once again, the QR code, yeah, if you will, to give us your feedback. Otherwise, I will stop sharing and then we can I'll hand the baton over to Brian, who will take it away. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Ben. So, according to research conducted by the Mindaru Foundation, more than 130 million metric tons of single-use plastic ended up as waste in 2019. And then 19% of this waste, which works out to about 25 million metric tons, becomes pollution that's dumped in either the oceans or on landfills or just around the world, right? And if you talk about the math, this is equivalent to about 23,000 adult blue whales, or works out to about 50 kilograms of single-use rubbish that is generated per person per year in places as developed as Australia and the United States. So closer home, a beach cleaned up by the organization called Small Change recently at Yishun Dam picked up more than 430 kilograms of waste, including 13 jerry cans, 4 motorcycle helmets, 1 large plastic barrel, 1/2 of an aircon casing, numerous foam blocks, tarpaulin, and plastic parts on the 25th of April 2021, Sunday, right? Just on that day alone. And then on another day, on the 10th of April 2021, Free Dive SG and Small Change picked up 245 kilograms of waste from Lazarus Island, including 2 huge foam mattresses, because Lazarus Island, as you all know, is the perfect place for us to take a nap, right? So we need to lock our foam mattresses there in order to take a nap there on the island, right? So the statistics are stunning. And Singapore's per capita household water use is about 141 to 145 liters per day per person, which works out to about 430 million gallons of water per day, or 782 Olympic-sized swimming pools. So with all these statistics as a kind of background information, I'm honored to welcome our esteemed speaker, Han Chong, who is from the Nature Society. So as a starter to this particular discussion, could you share a little more about what the Nature Society is all about and what you do as a member in this Nature Society?
All right, thank you, Brian. I'd like to, on behalf of the Nature Society, thank Kena Film Festival for inviting us once again to be part of the festival. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Han Zhong. Well, the Nature Society actually started in 1942, if I'm not wrong. This is just before the war. It was then known as the Malayan Nature Society. I mean, we were actually also part of British Malaya. And the Singapore branch of that, I think, was started in 1956. We are actually as old as the People's Action Party here, actually. Yeah, pre-independence. And just right about the time that I actually got to join in 1991, it was then we actually separated from our sister organization and became independent. And therefore we rebranded ourselves, so to speak, as the Nature Society bracket Singapore. We don't call ourselves Singapore Nature Society because actually we were preceded by another society that had a similar name. And so the registrar of society told us that, you know, we can't use someone else's name, but that's just semantics. So the society has, since its early days, being started by presumably British expatriates rather, they had this natural curiosity for the biodiversity, the spectacular biodiversity, you know, within Southeast Asia and the Sunda area, so to speak, in the Malay Peninsula. So it started with appreciating and studying nature. Of course, as we start to be aware of the environmental challenges of the impacts of human through the rays of seminal works like Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. I think this is where there is a greater how to put it, fervent for nature conservation and nature conservancy. So I think right now the Nature Society over the last 2 decades has been at the forefront, yeah, of being able to engage with different sectors of society here, yeah, including um, the public sector, government, parliamentarians, members, as well as the men on the street and the members of the public, yeah, to learn more about all the wonderful wildlife that we still have, actually, despite the massive loss through deforestation.
Thank you, Ang Shong, for that. And so there's, as you can see from the film, there's all sorts of ecologies that come to play with regards to the policy-making entities, the governments, and the people who are in governance, right? And then also you have the people who are the change makers, who are trying to make a change, who advocate for change. And you have also the people who are the locals in the local communities. So all these ecosystems work together. But what do you think is the greatest challenge that people in societies would face with regards to going greener or going for more sustainable efforts?
Well, I guess I can only speak for my own personal experience and observation living here in Singapore. So I'm born and bred in Singapore. And there's never a day where I had to think twice about turning on the tap, think twice about drinking straight off from the tap. And I do that almost every single day, everywhere in Singapore, actually. So much so that actually my main concern with our drinking water is that it might be actually too chlorinated for me. So I actually have 3 separate glass jars or bottles where I actually try to allow the chlorine to off gas, right? So chlorine, of course, is a useful antibacterial treatment that we use in our treated water. But as we all know, everything has its pros and cons. Yeah, too much of a good thing can be bad. And our water is also fluoridated as well. That's to protect our dental health. And there are of course, people out there who think that fluoridation, for example, may not be good if there's overdosage. So I know, for example, the Nordic countries do no longer fluoridate their water. Yeah, for example. So in the context of Singapore, I would say that because of this privilege that we have, that our water is so safe, we hardly actually think about it in terms of scarcity, in terms of safety. It's almost a given, right? That we enjoy this security, we enjoy the fact that we do not acquire the risk of waterborne diseases. And history has told us that human mortality is strongly tied to the quality of the water and sanitation as well. That the fact that we have extended human lifespans, I think one of the key major systemic changes is through proper sanitation and clean water. Yeah, so I guess it leads me back to what I remember in school about this Chinese saying, right? You all must help me, because although I was in a Chinese school, my Mandarin is terrible, about what they call 饮水思源. Yeah, we hardly ever think about where the water comes from, because we are now so detached from acquiring these basic needs for ourselves. We do no longer draw water from a well, like our ancestors perhaps. We don't drink straight from any river water systems. Yeah, and I think this taking things for granted perhaps is the greatest challenge insofar as Singaporeans like me are concerned.
Right, and we take these things that we have on the tip of our fingers for granted. The things about water accessibility. You just turn on the faucet and water is there. You switch on the light and there's light. So we take things like electricity and water for granted. And so with Sustainable Nation, we have these five change makers: Brian, Paula, Sivan, Eli, Clive, and Umar, who are in different parts of the world: Israel, Africa, California, places which is water scarce. Perhaps you don't feel this so much in Singapore because of the accessibility to water. But would you say that the methods that they're using in this sustainable nation would be adequate to address the global issue of water shortage? Or is there something more that needs to be done?
Well, that's a great question, Brian. So I think if we were to think about the example of Israel that was highlighted in the film, and I mean, I was just sharing with Benjamin earlier before we came onto the panel that if you look at the two histories of these two nations. Now in Singapore, the reason why we have spent every single dollar and effort to ensure that we are able to secure our own water supply was based on the lessons of World War II, where our so-called imperial masters lost the battle for Singapore, despite the fact that they had more soldiers at the time than the Japanese. So the Japanese were strategic enough to secure the water reservoirs, literally turn off the tap, and General Percival had to decide to surrender within 2 to 3 days. So from that stuck lesson about water security, and the fact that when we were still part of the Malay Federation, right, or even after that, where our so-called abang or big brother sometimes the politicians on from across the border threatened to turn off the tap. This actually then give rise to this impetus of, as I mentioned, trying to adopt different what is now known as the national taps, the 4 national taps. The first one being, of course, our initial reliance on water from Johor, and subsequently then damming up almost every single major river in Singapore, even the Singapore River, which is no longer a river. And there are consequences to that, which I may explain later. Desalination, for example. And then, of course, being the butt of, we became the butt of jokes, right? Because we were drinking our own pee, so to speak, with new water. So from that perspective, I think we can always learn from other nations, although no doubt we are not an agricultural nation like Israel that innovated drip irrigation. But that doesn't mean that Singapore's impact is just limited to our borders, because again, we are enjoying the fruits of our labor by being able to import literally every fruit, foodstuffs and fruit from all around the world. So the water footprint, so to speak, the water that's used to grow almost 90% of food actually comes from the world. The world is our hinterland, so to speak. So we need to be responsible for that too. We can't say that just because we have enough money to buy them means that we can ignore the consequences beyond our borders, because there's only one planet, right? I mean, and we all live in it.
You're absolutely right to say that the consequences are felt on a global arena. It's not just localized in one place, but something that is done very far away from Singapore. We do feel the ripple effects in Singapore right over here, and our actions in Singapore itself have ripple effects on the people around the world. For example, you give the example of the damming of the Singapore River, right, to become Marina Barrage and things like that. And so that has ramifications for nature, for the ecosystems and the ecologies right over there as well. We'd like to talk a little more about that, perhaps.
Okay, so while I'm no scientist, maybe I'll just use an example. So we do know of a famous fish that whose life cycle spans both the oceans, the seas, and the rivers, right? And they will make every effort to travel upstream, fight upriver, just so they can spawn. And their last so-called mission in life after the spawn is, they then rest in peace, upstream. So these types of creatures, I can't remember the scientific name. I think it's called andremas or andromas fishes. Means that I mean, we do eat them in Singapore. I'm quite sure you know what I'm referring to. Because we import them from Norway, for example, while Alaska. I mean, now we also farm them. So by damming up the rivers, and that's what's happening in some parts of their habitats, they are being threatened. Here in Singapore, although we don't have the salmon, we may have species that also may have similar life cycles, either by having their juvenile life stages in the sea or in riverine habitats, freshwater, and then reversing it in the next stage. So I do know, for example, in Malaya, and I think we probably did have this species here. This is the species that you most commonly find in our prawn, those places where people do recreational prawning. So there's this large freshwater prawn called udang gala, where the pincers are like 3 times or 2 times the size, the males, of the actual body. Yeah, the giant freshwater prawn. Now, from what I understand, this prawn lives its adult life in the freshwater, but it needs to go out to the estuary, the river mouth, the brackish water, where there's a mixture of freshwater and seawater, to actually broadcast its eggs. So once you have a river system that's dammed up, I'm not exactly sure whether such species will continue to exist or be able to thrive.
Indeed, the species are affected through human actions, and then different habitats are affected. The mangrove is affected, the coastal habitats are affected as well. Talking about rivers, so in the film, we also have the Ganga River, right, in India, and that has about 500 million people of a population living around it, and they use it as a place of purification. They go into bathe, they wash their clothes, they do everything there in the river because it's their life source. But we also know from Sustainable Nation that this life source is slowly becoming more and more polluted every day. And this stems from the different origins as well, from different villages that feed this polluted water into this Ganga River, right? So in COVID-19, this situation has exacerbated, of course, because the poor, as you know, can't cremate their dead, and they can't bury their dead. It's too expensive for them. So what they've done is that resorted to dumping the bodies of their loved ones into this river. And it says only crazy people would attempt to change the world. But given the state of pollution that a river like the Ganga River, this main river that runs through India, is facing, what tangible solutions can we human beings or even people from other countries offer if the situation is so bad in itself?
Yeah, Brian, if you would allow me, give me about maybe a second, because I realized that I think you all can't really see me that well. It's getting dark and my camera is quite bad. Let me try and see whether I can brighten up my room. Yeah, just give me a moment.
We now wait for a commercial break. So it's all about the care for creation and also sustainability. Also, whether and the question was whether, given the intense pollution that this Ganga River would have, right? Would our efforts be tangible, or is it a lost cause?
Yes, I think insofar as river pollution is concerned, the river Ganga is, of course, one dramatic case because it affects so many coastal populations and cities throughout its entire course. But that doesn't mean that in developed nations, you do not have similar issues, because even in the so-called greatest nation on earth, the United States, they do have disadvantaged communities where the river is so polluted, they can't drink from it. Flint River, I think, is the latest case. Yeah, where I think it's, in some cases, the drinking water, you can literally set it light on fire, right? And also usually in marginalized communities, especially indigenous populations, Native Americans, they do face similar issues as well. So while the current government in India and Prime Minister Modi has I think earmarked cleaning up the Ganga as one of his primary flagship programs, I think progress there has been limited from what I understand. Of course, this is information that I read online, which I can't verify. But certainly the images that has been shown in India, as you have mentioned, Brian, the fact that in their rituals, yes, they do use the river for various reasons, whether to bathe themselves or whether to cremate and release the ashes. Yeah, all these different activities do impact the rivers in their own way. Yeah, so I would say that, well, in some sense, you would think that perhaps those populations who are living in those rivers, they are either very, very resilient, to the point that they may be tolerating such pollution. But at some point, you will reach a tipping point, right? And I love to think of the fact that we might have to reach a tipping point. And actually, if I were to come back to Singapore, we also are facing similar challenges, because the media has highlighted, for one, that the water levels of the rivers in Johor that we are getting a waterfall from has reached record low levels, right? And that, I think, is just one indicator that the climate crisis is afoot, that global heating is upon us and its impacts. Then we had incidences of pollution in Sungai King. I think it's one of the tributaries towards the Johor River, where school children, and in schools and other affected residents will have to be hospitalized. Yeah, the challenges are not afar; they are close to home.
So the film also proposes certain solutions, right? That, but then we also know that these obstacles to these solutions could be found in the form of bureaucracy or political decisions, or even things like funding and getting the right equipment for a particular place and region. So on one hand, education could be a possible way of creating awareness about these problems that we might have. But on the other, we also have, I wonder if empowering people to make a collective decision would be a possible solution, right? So the film proposes technology as a possible solution, proposes education as a possible solution, but would empowering people to make a collective decision about such issues be a possible solution to the problem at hand?
Well, quite certainly, because I will give in this context what should I call it? A bouquet to our water agency, PUB, right? Because over the years, I think Singapore has realized that besides just ensuring the water quality in our reservoirs, at one point they were concerned that if we were able to have activities such as kayaking, canoeing, it may impact the rivers. What about fishing, for example? And even for fishing, it became kind of controversial because when people use baits, baits that are haram, for example, maybe pig liver into the rivers, then it becomes fairly contentious. So PUB has launched a program called Active, Beautiful, Clean. I have personally been involved in such programs on a personal basis where we actually educate participants on what are the parameters of water quality, how can you test them using very simple test kits, whether it's pH, turbidity. And as the science develops, I think there will be more and more such tools that will be available to the public as a form of citizen science, that you can also help to monitor your own local environment. Just look at the haze, for example, right? In the past, where people were actually scrambling to have, I think, PSI monitors. But that, of course, arose out of the fact that in some places they were fairly skeptical of government readings, yeah, for one. So I think having public trust is important, and gaining the trust is by working with. You can only gain public trust by working with civil society and the public with transparency. Yeah. So, and that's important. I think without that, I think without that, I don't think we would have handled the current COVID challenge as well as we have compared to elsewhere, for example.
And you're absolutely right to say that public trust and transparency is the way to go in terms of pandemics, in terms of our resources as well. In the film, Ally says the only way to solve it is to go back to Mother Nature. So this is just one last question before I open it up to the floor, because I'm conscious of the fact that we're running out of time. What are some low carbon footprint solutions that you recommend for sustainability that we ourselves as ordinary human beings who are not part of any government agencies can do and participate in?
Well, I'll actually go out on a limb here to say that if I were to cite different reports, and one report, some reports will talk about what can you as an individual do to reduce your ecological footprint. So that includes both carbon, water, and perhaps other resources. In a Singapore context, because we import virtually everything, even the sand that our island is being built on as we expand, and cement, for example, all these resources actually have great impact. Yeah, and I think the number one thing you can do from such reports is to actually have one less kid or child, because one new child into a society, especially one that's living in a first world condition like ourselves, consume vastly more resources than perhaps a child in Bangladesh. I think the comparison was one US child will consume 5 times as much as someone from China, and someone from China will consume another, I think 2 or 3 more times from someone in Bangladesh, for example. So that's how they compared it, right? And then the next few are, I think number 2 is actually to have, to transit towards a plant-based diet, or less meat has been, I think, earmarked as number 2. Number 3 would be, I think, in terms of our perchance for flying, because the carbon footprint for our air miles actually is quite great. But this is where the inequality comes in, because some studies show that, or claim that it's like in UK, only the top 10% of flyers, the frequent flyers, actually account for the vast majority of the carbon emissions. Yeah, but it's no doubt that we, as Singaporeans as a whole, are probably not far behind because, you know, of number one, budget airline, and then the fact that, you know, we just love to travel out of Singapore, and the fact that we're just so small. With and I'll go out and limit there by suggesting that perhaps we might need to also look into the actual total population that we have here, whether we are beyond the actual carrying capacity, because already we are not sustainable in any way, right? We don't produce any of our basic needs to any significant extent. Yeah. However, in terms of technology, and this is then I'll refer you to a notable report called the Drawdown Report. I'm afraid I can't remember all the technological solutions there, but if I recall, even working on things like food waste, things like refrigeration, and I think they suggest education for women is actually ranked very, very high. Yeah, because when you empower women, especially in more marginalized communities, they can actually make decisions that is actually better for the environment.
And I agree with what you're saying, that actually human beings are very much part of the problem. But also, given that the fact that we are, talking about the politics of small change, that every person makes a difference and every person counts, that we can do our own part as well in whatever small way it is to be a solution more than a problem, right? So thank you so much for sharing all these initiatives. So I'll just have 1 minute to just put it out to the floor. Does anybody have any questions for Hang Chong today? Today has been a very informative session, and I'd like to thank Hang Chong for taking his time to be with us today. It is indeed the fact that everybody has a responsibility to be a steward of God's creation, and we have a share and a part in this wondrous thing, because 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, 50 years down the road, what are we going to leave our children? Right? So the things that we do today, the trees that we plant today will make a difference to our progeny, right? And so with that, I will wrap up and then I'll hand it back to Benjamin. Benjamin, over to you, please.
All right, thank you, Brian, and thank you, Hang Chong, for a really, really good discussion. And thank you for being so upfront and sharing with your thoughts and insights. And of course, I'd like to thank everybody here as well. And before we end off the session, just like to invite everybody to turn on your webcam. If you're here, just we want to take a screenshot, a group photo, if you will. So can I just invite everybody to just turn on your webcams? If you're with me, that's right. Okay, great. All right, awesome. Is there Sophia? Are you able to turn on your webcam? Okay, great. Yep, just wait for a couple of seconds more.
I was going to, Ben, but I noticed that mine has this C200 background, so better not.
Oh.
I'm not sure how it got there.
Okay.
Well, thank you
all
everyone
right.
for turning on your cameras. At least it's nice to be able to put the names to faces.
Thanks, and
Thank you again
thanks,
for
Brian.
having me. Yeah.
Okay, great. Let's have the screenshot. Sorry, Prasad, you're counting down, is it?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks,
Last
Prasad.
one, 2, 3. Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you, everybody, and we'll
Thank
catch you
you
around.
all.
Yes,
Yeah,
take
thank
care.
you.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
God bless.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
It's too late.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you.
Thanks, Ang Chong.
Yeah,
Bye.
thank you so
See
much
you.
again, Benjamin.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Catch you around. See you around. Yes.
Yes, please. I hope to be able to meet you all in person. Hi,
Yeah,
Prasad,
hopefully soon, man.
Isabel.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for helping behind the scenes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Take care.
Okay.
Bye.
You take care.
Bye.
Bye.